So what killed the great composer Mozart? Even a single mouthful can kill, cripple, or condemn the victim to a lifetime of aches and pains. We never really pay attention until something breaks. A quarter of us will visit the fast food restaurant every single day. All he asks is that we follow his good advice. So what is your New Year's resolution this year? Most of us commit to, better health. Life is a series of decisions. Some are really big, like choosing the career or choosing your spouse. Others seem small, like what you're going to eat for breakfast or lunch or maybe dinner, or how you're going to spend a few extra minutes in your day. Yet every decision, whether it's big or small, shapes who you are and who you are becoming. You'll find that Jesus spent most of the time here on earth doing two things, teaching and healing. In Matthew 9:35, then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, healing every sickness and every disease among the people. So Jesus couldn't stand aside knowing that some of the people were really suffering from ailments in their lives. So he opened the blind eyes, he healed the crippled legs, he cured leprosy. In fact, he even touched a leper, a man who hadn't felt a warm touch of a human in years. And when Jesus came to town, sometimes even the dead came back to life. Now in John chapter 10, verse 10, it says, "The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and they may have it more abundantly." Beloved, I pray that you would prosper in all things and be in health. So let me ask you a biblical question. How many of each animal did Noah take on the ark? And when we look at Genesis chapter 7, verse 2, you shall take of you 7 of each of the clean animals, a male and female, 2 of each animal that are unclean, a male and his female. When you begin to look at the ark and some of the things that you've been told, that were not good information. They call it nowadays false information. Today, medical science is discovering that the Bible was absolutely right, though. The people who avoid unclean foods are living much longer than the rest of us. So of course we need to know what is clean and unclean. We need to know how to tell the difference. Ezekiel chapter 22 verse 26 says, "Her priests have violated my laws and have profaned my holy things. They have put no difference between the holy and the profane, neither have they showed difference between the unclean and the clean, and have hid their eyes from the Sabbath, and I am profaned among them." I want you to listen very carefully to the promise God gave to the children of Israel back in the book of Exodus. He says, "If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do all right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought to the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." In Exodus 23:25, "So you shall serve the Lord your God, and you will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of you." So according to the Bible, there's no question that you can improve your well-being when you're committed to a relationship with God. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that Christians are never going to get sick or that Christians don't die, but you can significantly change what you're doing and how long you live by following the Bible. So Jesus paid a price. He bought you for a price. He wants you to have life more abundantly, and it's possible through Jesus, even today. I've always struggled with my New Year's resolutions, especially the ones that are about a diet. Now, there are many quick diets out there. You can get skinny quick. But which one will really give you a better life, increase your years of life in this world? We are always looking for better health, right? So steps to better health, a vibrant, loving, obedient relationship with God, they all go together. You get what you put in. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19, it says, "Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own?" So if you're a Christian, if you're a child of God, then your body is it's on loan to you. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 20, it says, "For you were bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body." They say that something is only worth what people are willing to pay. And that's amazing. It's amazing that God values us that highly. But how often do we actually treat our bodies like God owns them instead of us? Day in and day out, most of us trash our bodies. We get by with not enough sleep, way too much stress, and then we got coffee and donuts for breakfast, supper through a little window in a drive-through, and then we're shocked when our bodies break down. You know, I'm reminded of an old story, a man who wanted to visit a famous monastery in Portugal. One that went up on top of the mountain from a 300-foot cliff. And the only way to get up there was in a basket on a rope. And, you know, he climbs into the basket and the monks haul you up to the top. Then this man gets into the basket and had a wonderful day at the top of the cliff. But at the end of the day, when it was time to leave, he climbs back into the basket and he glances up at the rope. It was an old frayed rope, and it looked like it might break at any moment. So as the monks get started to lower him over the edge of the cliff, he asks them a question. Just how often do you replace this rope? And they say, well, anytime the old one breaks, we replace it. You know, that's kind of the way we treat our own bodies. We never really pay attention until something breaks. But the Bible advises us to pay better attention to our bodies because they're God's. So in 1 Corinthians 6:20, it says, for you were bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body. And that's the whole secret. You know, in life, health is something that I've always struggled with. Now, I'm aware of the decisions I made earlier in life well, it's now affected me in a very bad way sometimes. And it's funny, I never really paid attention to all the warning signs. We never pay attention to that warning at the bottom of the package. We never pay attention until something breaks. But the Bible advises us to pay better attention. That's the whole secret. Glorify God in your body. So now let's flesh that out a little bit. Let's ask some really honest questions. We have some of the worst habits as human beings. Some things that we put into our bodies, and let's ask if those things are really there glorifying God. And I want to start with, well, an easy one, kind of a no-brainer. Really, can I smoke cigarettes and glorify God? What do we know about smoking? You know, cigarettes can contain more than 4,000 different chemicals. Cigarettes is enough nicotine to actually kill you. And smokers die 22.5 years earlier than the average person. What about alcohol? Proverbs 20 verse 1 says, wine is a mocker, a strong drink. It is a brawler. And whosoever is led astray is not wise. I've spent my time not being wise in life. So let's be honest about the plain word of God. Does God say alcohol is wise or unwise? Well, of course, a strong drink, right? It's not really talking about mild drinks like beer, right? Yeah, actually it is. So back in Solomon's time, beer was a strong drink. And the beer that people drink today our beer is much stronger than what he had. And God says that strong drink or alcoholic drink is unwise. And today we know that God he was absolutely right. In America, more than 85,000 people die every year as a direct result of consuming alcohol. And we lose up to 6% of our GDP growth in our country. So alcohol consumption costs us about $26 billion a year just in healthcare. And because people miss so much work, the whole economy loses right around $185 billion every year. 10% of our health insurance premiums and 40% of your car insurance premiums is paying the cost of alcohol consumption. And if money was the only problem, that would be bad enough. Go and ask the police what they see on a typical Saturday night. Ask them how often alcohol is a factor of domestic violence. Go and ask the people in the emergency room how much their weekend is spent mopping up the after effects of alcohol. The U.S. Department of Health and the Human Services all tell us that 53% of the murders involve alcohol. 57% of the rapes are alcohol. 47% of robberies, 60% of assaults, 80% of suicides are alcohol related. And then you've got to consider what it's doing to your brain. Even one drink starts killing brain cells. And almost worse, alcohol lowers your moral inhibitions. So when you drink even a little bit, it actually makes it easier to sin. You listen to the amazing Bible passage from the book of Proverbs. It's one of the most vivid descriptions of the effects of alcohol I've ever seen. And I'm going to use the old King James Version because the language is, it's pretty blunt. So in Proverbs 23:29 through 31, it says, "Who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babbling? Who hath wounds without cause, and hath redness of eyes? Who are the people who suffer like this? They that tarry long at the wine, and they seek mixed wine. Look not upon the wine when it is red, and even when it gives the color in the cup, when it moveth itself all right. At last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an otter. Thy eyes shall behold strange women, and thy heart shall utter perverse things." So how many people do you know have all these huge regrets because of something they did while they were under the influence of alcohol? You know, Proverbs 31:4 and 5, it says it this way: "It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes intoxicated drink, lest these drinks and forget the law, and perverse the justice of all the afflicted." And you got to ask, what about the wedding feast of Cana? Didn't Jesus turn water into wine? Well, that's really a good question. And the answer is yes, he did. But it wasn't alcoholic wine. And let me explain that. There are two things in the Bible that describe wine. Like most of the villages in that region, Cana was a very small town and maybe only a few hundred people. And the story says that Jesus made 6 pots of wine with about 20 to 30 gallons apiece. That means that he made somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons of wine. So here's something else I want you to think about. Back in Jesus' time, weddings went on for days. And at the end of the wedding, after they ran out of wine, the governors tasted what Jesus had made. And he said, "This is the best wine I've ever tasted." Now, Jesus isn't going to say, yeah, alcohol isn't really a bad idea in the Old Testament, and then hand out in the New Testament alcohol. And you know that God isn't going to condone anything that makes it easier for us to sin. So here's how I like to think about it. The God of the Bible, the God that I love, absolutely hates suffering. And alcohol is one of the biggest causes of pain and suffering in this entire world. I'm not going to have any part of it because I don't think Jesus would want any part of it either. And I'm going to boycott the whole misery industry. So now, while I'm busy ruining everybody's fun, how about we go one step further? Let's look in your kitchen. And I mean, well, because there's a lot of things that have gone wrong in our kitchens. What about all the caffeine that North Americans use to survive the middle of the work? And I mean the long-running fun. Let's really get into this. Let's think about this. The Bible never mentions Starbucks or Red Bull, but I think we should actually apply some biblical principles and be smart about this. We know for sure that caffeine consumption has been linked to, well, sleep disorders, headaches, high blood pressure, irregular heartbeats, constricted blood vessels, memory loss, tremors, convulsions, and we know that it seems to be a catalyst for carcinogens, which really means caffeine. It also helps your cancer grow. But I'm going to leave it up to you because it's kind of a personal decision. But we do know this, it is a toxin, and people who quit live longer and happier lives. And besides, just think about what we're doing to our bodies. When our whole system is crying out for sleep, we slam down another coffee and force ourselves to stay awake. And it's just something to think about. Let's take a look in our fridge. You know, in North America, we're becoming some of the sickest people on earth. And it's not because of infectious diseases. Most of what's killing us in the 21st century is completely avoidable. They're lifestyle diseases. We spend $110 billion a year on deep fried fast foods. 1/3 of our kids are going to be diabetics. And 1/4 of us will visit the fast food restaurant every single day. Far too many of our meals are getting handed to us through that little window. And we've got to ask, is that how God designed the human body? And the answer is simple, it's no. In fact, the book of Genesis describes a perfect fuel for our body. In Genesis 1:29, and God said, "See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruits yield seed, and it shall be food for you." The original diet was, well, vegetarian. And that makes sense. Really, if you stop and think about it, you really can't see Adam and Eve chasing down a cow with a knife, right? But in the beginning, humans were designed to live on plant-based foods. Now that doesn't mean that everybody has to become a vegetarian, because we know that Jesus probably ate the Passover lamb and he also ate fish. But in the beginning, the human diet didn't involve killing animals, and today people do adopt a Garden of Eden diet, absolutely live longer than the rest of us. They even have less diseases. Now eventually God did permit us to eat meat after the flood, but there's one thing that many people fail to notice. He didn't give us permission to eat anything that you want. God was very specific about that. And even today, God tells us to use what he has given us. You know, I grew up on a farm. I grew up on a farm with chickens, with pigs, with cows, and we even had a few goats from time to time. And I learned a lot from being on the farm. But I really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to all the lessons that I really learned. So what about that question? How many of each animal did Noah take into the ark? You know, in Genesis chapter 7, verse 2, it says, "You shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 of animals that are unclean, male and his female." How did Noah know the difference between what was clean and what was unclean? Leviticus hadn't been written yet, but in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 3 through 7, it says, "Among the animals, whatsoever divides a hoof, having cloven hooves, and chewing the cud, that you may eat. Nevertheless, you shall not eat among those that chew the cud, or that have cloven hooves. The camel, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. The rock, the hyax, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, it is unclean to you. The hare, because it chews the cud but it does not have cloven hooves, it is unclean to you." What about the hare? It is a bunny. But there's more. Do you want to see it? That's the question. And if you're not sure, well, the swine. It divides the hoof. It has cloven hooves, but it is unclean to you because it does not chew the cud. You know, after a heart attack, it's very clear what the doctor tells you, and he tells you to avoid certain things in your life. And it might be good sense to avoid the swine so that you don't have problems in the first place. So what killed the great composer Mozart by age 35? And it took years to figure it out, but just a few years ago, an amazing story showed up in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and they figured it out. There was something to do with his lunch, something that wasn't quite actually discovered for another 50 plus years. In 1846, a scientist by the name of Joseph Leidy found something in his lunch that, well, he didn't like at all. Tiny little worms. It was trichinosis. It was a parasite that's found in the flesh of pigs and bears. ABC News actually reported on this on June 11, 2001, and reported all the things that you needed to understand. A lot of human suffering has happened because of that. One of the most graphic articles I've ever seen on trichinosis is from the Reader's Digest all the way back. Reader's Digest, a single serving of infected pork, even a single mouthful, can kill, cripple, or condemn the victim to a lifetime of aches and pains. For this unique disease, trichinosis, there is no cure. With no drug to stop them, the worms may spread through the muscular tissue and the entire human system. Physicians can confuse trichinosis with some 50 different ailments, ranging from typhoid fever all the way to acute alcoholism. The pain that's in your arm or your leg are arthritis, rheumatism, or it could be trichinosis. Feel a little pain in your joints right now? You might want to stop and think about it. But a few years back, Illinois' Health Messenger gave a very unsettling report on what they discovered in the human autopsies. 1/6 of us have live trichina. 1/5 of the pork products had live worms. So you will eat roughly about 200 infested meals in your life. So what exactly killed Mozart? His diary says that he died after his wife made him pork chops. At the time of his death, that was about the same time it takes for a bad case of trichinosis to incubate and then kill you. God says don't eat this stuff. So what about fish? Here's what the Bible says. Leviticus 11, verse 9. "These you may eat of all that are in the water. Whatever is in the water that has fins and scales, whether it's in the seas or in the rivers, you may eat." So the rule for fish are really simple. A clean fish has fins and scales. That includes things like salmon, halibut, cod, tuna. they all have scales. But catfish, well, catfish is absolutely unclean. It doesn't have scales. In Leviticus chapter 11, verse 12, it says, whatever is in the water does not have fins or scales, that shall be an abomination to you. So what would that include? Well, shellfish. What about clams, oysters, shrimp, lobsters, crabs? That one's going to hurt a lot if you live in Maryland. And again, it's the scavengers, the animals who clean up the sea. And we know that when a dead body sinks to the bottom of the ocean, the first animals to show up are the lobsters, the crabs, and the shrimp. And the other sea creatures, well, they don't really have fins and scales. They'll show up too. Why? Because they're the garbage cleanup crew. They clean up the sewage, they clean up the rot, they clean up the filth in the bottom of the ocean. And God says, if I were you, I would stay clear of that. So we know it's got to have split hooves, chew the cud, and it's got to have fins and scales. And what about birds? Leviticus covers that too in Leviticus chapter 11, 13 through 20. And these are they which shall have an abomination among the fowls, they that are not eaten flesh, those that are abomination, the eagle, the ostrich, the osprey, the vulture, the kite after its kind, every raven in its kind, the owl, the hawk after its kind, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the swan, the pelican, the eagle, the stork, all after their kind. All fowls creep going upon all fours. They're an abomination to you. You know, while growing up on our farm, it was always important to pray. And it seems to be lost on time. You know, we live in a time where families no longer sit down at the table and they eat together, they pray together. We all seem to be going different directions at different times. Again, I was taught it's always good to pray over your food. Ask God for a blessing. Ask Him to bless our bodies for what He's given us, what we're about to put in it. What about Peter's vision? Acts chapter 10, 9 through 15 covers this. The next day, as they went on their journey and they drew near to the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. And then he became very hungry and he wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell asleep in a trance. And he saw heaven opened, and an object like a great sheet bound on the four corners descending to him and let down on the earth. And it were all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creepy things, birds of the air. And a voice came to him and said, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, No, not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean. And the voice spoke to him a second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." Ah, there you have it. Jesus declared all food clean. And now we can eat those pork chops. All we gotta do is pray over it. But is that what's really happening there? We need to pay attention to the rest of the story. In Acts chapter 10, verse 17, it says, "Now while Peter was wondering within himself what the vision which he had seen meant, behold, the man who had been sent from Cornelius had made known the inquiry of Simon's house, stood before the gate." Now, what happens next right after the vision? Well, first of all, Peter's struggling. See, you have to understand what it means. And then suddenly, there are Gentiles knocking at the door. Gentiles sent by God. This is the moment when Cornelius, the Gentile, fully accepts the gospel and he gives his heart to Jesus Christ. But in Peter's world, Gentiles were considered unclean. They even called them dogs. They felt that just the mere contact with a Gentile made you unclean. So God knew that Peter was going to struggle with accepting the Gentiles, and he sent a vision to help him out, help him get through it. And when Peter saw those Gentile men standing at the door, he finally quit wondering, and he knew exactly what it meant. In Acts chapter 10, verse 28, it said, "Then he said unto them, You know how unlawful it is for a Jewish man to keep company with or go with one another from another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean." God has shown me what? That we should call any pig unclean? No. It is a vision about people, and it has nothing to do with diet. It's just an illustration. and unclean animals are still just as bad for you as they were for Noah and Peter. So here's what it boils down to. God knows this world is hard, and He knows that you and I, we're going to suffer as we wait for Jesus to come. And while you wait, He wants you to get the most out of this life. He wants you to get the most out of our bodies. Our bodies belong to Him, and He paid an unbelievably high price for them. And He's asking you to do your best to take care of what He's given you. He wants you to take care of your body while you wait. So listen to what the Bible actually says. In Romans chapter 12, verse 1, He says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Ezekiel 22:26 says, her priests have violated my law and profaned my holy things. They have put no difference between the holy and the profane, neither have they shed the difference between the unclean and the clean, and have hid their eyes from my Sabbaths, and have profaned me among them. Isaiah 66:16-17 says, for by the fire and by His word the Lord will plead with all flesh, and that the slain of the Lord shall be many. They that sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens behind one tree in the midst, eating swine's flesh, and the abomination, the mouse, even to consume together, saith the Lord. Again, the Bible's clear. We just want to have it our way. You know, I always struggled with Peter's vision. I found it kind of strange that we could eat something that was actually bad for us. And as long as we prayed over it, we could eat it. And it'd be good for us. Never made sense. You know, it never really worked for my car either. There were some sketchy places that I filled up with gas, and I would pray that I wouldn't have any water in the fuel. It'd be good fuel. But sure enough, when my motor died, I knew I'd done something bad in it. I knew that I should not have stopped there. God has shown us what is good for us, and we do know what is better than to eat things that God has said not to eat. He has given us a manual. He has given us Jesus Christ, and He has bought us with a price. All He asks is that we follow His good advice, love Him for what He has given us, and follow Jesus as He leads us to eternal life. Ultimately, it's your decision. Today is a simple question. Who do you choose?